Clara Voss had always believed in the restorative power of solitude. In her 30 years of life, she had traveled more national parks than most people would in a lifetime, capturing moments of raw wilderness through the lens of her Nikon. Her photographs, still cold, aching with beauty, had once hung in the modest art galleries of Eugene, Oregon, where she lived. But even the natural world couldn't insulate her completely from human pain. In the spring of 2012, Clara was recovering from a deep personal rupture, a 5-year relationship that had ended not with shouting or betrayal, but with the slow, suffocating drift of two people growing apart. No drama, no closure, just silence. And Clara hated silence when it wasn't on her own terms. So when the Cascade Wilderness Preserve opened early that June due to unusually mild weather, Clara saw it as a sign. 10 days alone in Northern Range, remote trails, thick forests, and no cell service was not a risk for her. It was a ritual. She packed with precision her tent, food rations, satellite beacon, a new GPS tracker, and 2 camera lenses she had saved for all winter. Her route was simple. Start from North Pines Ranger Station, follow the White Elk Trail west for 7 days, then turn southward through Blackstone Gorge, returning via the Timberline Lakes. She left behind a note on her fridge for her mother, Judith, gone hiking. Back June 20th. Love you. Clara always notified someone. It was a habit formed after she once sprained an ankle in Yosemite and waited 14 hours before a ranger found her. She had learned from that. This time she submitted her entire itinerary to the North Pine Station, just as the regulations required. It was early morning, June 10th, when she pulled into the gravel lot of the ranger station. A canopy of pine trees framed the wooden structure, weathered and modest, with a stone chimney and a porch that creaked beneath every step. There was no one inside at first. She waited. A black and white photo of a mountain lion hung crookedly on the wall beside a bulletin board covered in faded missing persons flyers and trail closure warnings. She was flipping through a pamphlet on bear safety when a man emerged from the back office. "Morning," he said. Clara turned. The man was tall, maybe 6'3", with the build of someone who still split firewood. His park uniform fit well, dark green against a buttoned flannel underneath. His face was lean, angular, the skin weather-worn. Gray streaked his temples, but his beard was neatly trimmed. What stood out were his eyes, pale blue-gray, almost silvery and unreadable. "Sorry to keep you waiting. I was restocking the back room," he said. "I'm Ranger Sutton." "Eli Sutton?" She extended her hand. "Clara Voss, registered online last week." He walked to the desk, pulled out a metal clipboard, and began flipping through the schedule. "Ah, here you are. White Elk Trail. Long one." She nodded. 10 days. "Maybe less if I push it." Eli inspected her gear. He didn't make small talk, didn't ask why she was hiking alone, which she appreciated. He checked her satellite beacon, her stove, the water filter, and the food bear canisters. Then he walked around her car, noted the license plate, and wrote down her emergency contact. "Forecast says light rain by Thursday," he said. "Trail can get slippery past mile 24, near the ridge. Good to know. And the river crossings. Don't trust the logs. Always test first. Last year someone went in after thinking the moss was dry." Clara smirked. "I've been doing this a while." He didn't return the smile, just stared at her for a second, longer than necessary. Not in a way that felt inappropriate. More like he was studying something. "Be careful," he said, signing the bottom of her permit. "The forest changes out there. Faster than you'd think." Clara thanked him, clipped the permit to her backpack, and returned to her car. Before driving off toward the trailhead, she looked back at the station. Eli was standing on the porch, watching her. He raised his hand in a slow, almost reluctant wave. She waved back, then drove into the trees. The first day passed like a ritual Clara had rehearsed 100 times. The trail was well marked and dry. Tall Douglas firs rose around her like cathedral pillars. Moss clung to every stone. The air was cool and clean, tinged with the scent of pine sap and old soil. She paused often, to take photographs, to breathe, to remind herself that this was where she felt most alive. By the second night, Clara had reached Campsite 4, a small clearing beside a low creek. She pitched her tent beneath a hemlock tree, boiled water for pasta, and wrote in her journal by headlamp. June 11. Stillness like this should be illegal. No service, no cars, no voices. I heard a barred owl earlier. Or maybe a fox? She drew a small sketch in the corner, an outline of a mountain ridge that had caught the golden light just before dusk. On the third day she passed a couple heading east, retirees from Idaho who warned her of a washed-out footbridge ahead. "Take the detour," the woman said, "unless you want wet socks for 3 days." She thanked them and adjusted her GPS accordingly. Each night, Clara camped in designated areas, campsite 5, then 6, noting how the signs became older, the clearings less maintained. By June 13th, she estimated she was 30 miles from the nearest road. The silence was different out here. Not peaceful, hollow, she couldn't quite explain it. At campsite 6, there were no other hikers. Only a half-broken picnic table, a rusted fire ring, and a thin trail that disappeared into a curtain of evergreens. The only sound was the breeze stirring through leaves. She set up camp quickly, feeling unease for the first time. Not fear, exactly, but a certain alertness she hadn't felt in years. She chalked it up to exhaustion and made herself dinner. That night, as the fire burned low, Clara sat alone, sipping warm tea from a tin cup. The sky was ink-black above the trees, and a half-moon filtered through the canopy. She watched the flames dance and let her thoughts slow. Then she heard it. Not close, but not distant either. Footsteps, deliberate, soft, coming from the trail behind her. She turned, expecting maybe a late-arriving hiker or a deer. A man emerged from the darkness. He wore a ranger's uniform. His boots were muddy, his wide-brimmed hat shadowed most of his face, but she recognized the voice immediately. "Evening," he said. Clara stood slowly, brushing her hands on her jeans. The fire crackled behind her, casting flickering shadows across the mossy ground. The man stepped closer into the ring of light. He was still in uniform, the same dark green shirt, patch on the arm, utility belt around his waist. But without the desk, the station, or the daylight, something about him felt misaligned. "Ranger Sutton?" she asked, uncertain. He nodded once. "I was on patrol. Thought I'd swing by. Make sure you were all right." Clara hesitated. "I'm good, thanks. Didn't expect to see anyone out here this late." "I don't usually come this far after dark," he said, "but sometimes I check in on solo hikers, especially the ones camping alone this deep." There was a pause. Eli glanced at her permit clipped to the side of her backpack, which rested near the tent. "You've got everything in order," he added. "You're experienced. I could tell that right away." She offered a polite smile, but her fingers tightened around the metal cup in her hand. Her instincts weren't alarm bells, not yet, but they were humming. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. "Still warm?" He shook his head. "No, thanks, I can't stay long, just thought I'd say hello." He remained standing, shifting his weight slightly, hands behind his back. His eyes moved over the campsite, slow, careful. The fire, the tent, the gear, the trees. Clara watched his gaze settle momentarily on her journal. Then it returned to her face. "You're not nervous out here?" he asked. "Should I be?" His expression didn't change. "No, but most people are, especially at night. The forest can feel bigger when you're alone." She forced a small laugh. "I've been alone most of my life. This doesn't scare me. I suppose you don't scare easy." A silence stretched between them. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't warm either. "I should let you rest," he said finally, his voice softening. "Be safe out here, Clara." He turned and disappeared into the trees without another word. Clara didn't move for nearly a full minute after he left. The shadows beyond the fire line now felt thicker, like they'd shifted in some imperceptible way. She poured the rest of her tea onto the ground, doused the fire until it hissed out, and zipped herself into the tent. Before she closed her eyes, she reached for the bear spray on the inside flap and held it in her hand, just in case. Sleep came reluctantly. It didn't last. She woke with a jolt, her heart thudding. It was pitch black, save for the pale wash of moonlight leaking through the nylon walls. She couldn't say what had stirred her. Not yet. No voices, no wind. Then she heard it again, a slow, dragging sound like fabric being sliced. She sat up, blinking into the dark. The sound repeated, this time closer, unmistakable. A knife, cutting. The side of her tent near the foot was being opened from the outside. She lunged for the bear spray, but a heavy force pressed down on her chest, and a gloved hand clamped over her mouth. Panic exploded in her lungs. She thrashed, kicking, twisting, but the figure was too strong. Another arm locked around her throat. The blade finished its job. A slit in the tent opened like a wound, and the man pulled her through it, dragging her into the forest. She fought, every movement wild and desperate. She landed a kick to his shin, a fist to his jaw, but it didn't slow him. He muttered something under his breath, indecipherable, as he wrestled her down, pinned her, and began tying her wrists behind her back with thick, coarse rope. "Don't, please, what are you?" she gasped until the gag went in. A cloth jammed into her mouth and tied at the back of her head. In the dim moonlight she saw the face. It was Eli Sutton, expressionless, focused. He lifted her like a duffel bag over his shoulder and began walking, fast, purposeful, without any hesitation, straight into the forest where no trail marked the way. Branches scraped her face. Her body bounced with each step. She tried to scream through the gag, tried to remember directions, landmarks, any detail. But there were none. Just darkness, just trees. They crossed a stream, shallow, freezing, climbed a small incline. The journey took perhaps 20 minutes, or maybe longer. Time lost meaning. She was cold, terrified, and helpless. Finally, Eli stopped. Before them stood a small structure, wooden, sagging, overgrown with moss. A shack, no lights, no windows, just a door with rusted hinges and a lock. He opened it with a key. Inside was blackness. He carried her in, set her down, and closed the door behind them. The air was stale, damp, like mildew and smoke. She heard the metallic click of a kerosene lamp being lit. A warm, sickly glow spread across the room. 4 walls. No windows, a stove, a metal bucket, a bed against one wall. Tools on hooks, a saw, an axe, a hammer, a chair, a chain bolted to the floor near the foot of the bed. She whimpered. He knelt, undid the gag, and finally spoke. "Don't scream," he said calmly. "No one will hear you. This cabin isn't on any map. I know this forest better than anyone. You could scream for a week, and the trees still wouldn't answer." She didn't speak. He reached for the chain, cold iron. He wrapped it around her ankle and fastened the lock. "You'll stay here," he said, his voice devoid of anger. "You'll get used to it. I'll take care of you, and if you obey, it won't be so bad." Then he stood, walked to the door, and left. The lock turned behind him, and Clara was alone. Clara woke to darkness and silence so complete it felt physical, pressing against her ears. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then the cold iron around her ankle pulled her fully awake. The chain was tight but not cutting off circulation, deliberate, measured. She sat up slowly, testing its length. 2 steps in any direction, no more. The cabin smelled of damp wood and old smoke. Somewhere nearby, water dripped at irregular intervals. The kerosene lamp was gone. Only a thin blade of gray light seeped through a crack near the door, suggesting morning. She called out once, not screaming. "Just a name. Eli?" There was no answer. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Without a clock, time dissolved into sensation. Hunger came first, then thirst, then the ache in her wrists where the rope had burned her skin. She inspected the room carefully, forcing herself to slow down, to observe like she would a photograph. One door, reinforced. Locked from the outside, no windows. The stove was cold, the tools on the wall were out of reach. Everything in the room had been placed with intention. By the time the door opened again, Clara was sitting on the floor with her back against the bed, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around herself. Eli entered carrying a canvas bag. He looked no different than he had the night before. Calm, composed, methodical. He avoided her eyes as he set down a plastic bottle of water and a plate with 2 slices of bread and canned meat. "You need to eat," he said. She didn't move. He crouched slightly, not close enough to touch her. "You can make this harder, or you can make it tolerable. That choice is yours." Her voice came out hoarse. "Why are you doing this?" He studied her, as if weighing whether the question deserved an answer. "Because you were alone. Because you understand this place. Because I needed someone who wouldn't panic." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." He waited until she drank, until she ate. Then he took the empty plate and left without another word. The routine established itself quickly. Eli came twice a day, once in the early morning, once just before nightfall. Food, water, silence. He never lingered, never raised his voice, never explained anything further. The second day, Clara tried to scream. It was a raw, primal sound that tore out of her chest the moment the door opened. Eli reacted instantly. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pressed her face into the mattress, and tied her wrists above her head with practiced efficiency. He gagged her and left. When he returned the following evening, she was weak, dehydrated, shaking. He untied her slowly. "If you do that again," he said, "you'll lose privileges." "And I don't want to do that." "What privileges?" she whispered. "Food, water, movement." On the 3rd day, Clara stopped asking questions. She began to listen instead. She memorized the sound of Eli's boots approaching, the pattern of his breathing, the way he always checked the lock twice before leaving. She noticed he never brought a weapon into the cabin, only a knife kept at his belt. She noticed his hands trembled slightly when he poured water, but only sometimes. At night, alone, she pressed her ear to the floorboards and listened to the forest. Wind, insects, once distant thunder. The world still existed. That thought became a lifeline. On the fourth day, Eli brought a book. It was old, its cover frayed, the pages yellowed. A paperback novel, something philosophical, something he must have read many times. "I thought you might like this," he said, placing it just within reach of the chain. She took it with trembling hands. "Thank you." He paused at the door as if surprised by the word. "You're welcome," he said quietly. That night, Clara read the same page over and over, not absorbing the words so much as anchoring herself to the act of reading. Proof that her mind was still hers. On the fifth day, Eli spoke more than he had since the abduction. "You'll be safe here," he said, almost to himself. "No one will hurt you. Out there, people disappear all the time. This forest eats them." Clara didn't respond, but she understood something then. Something cold and vital. This was not a crime of impulse. This was a system. And if she wanted to survive it, she would have to learn its rules better than the man who built it. By the end of the first week, Clara no longer woke expecting rescue. That realization came quietly, without panic. It settled into her body the way cold did, slowly, thoroughly, until resistance only made it worse. Eli never announced rules, but they revealed themselves through consequence. Sound brought punishment. Curiosity brought deprivation. Compliance brought stability. Stability, she learned, was the currency of survival. Each morning the door opened at roughly the same time, though Clara could only guess by the color of light slipping through the crack near the hinges. Eli entered without greeting, carrying measured portions of food and water. He never crossed the invisible boundary near the bed unless necessary. He never touched her unless she forced the situation. Control, for him, was not chaos. It was order. "You'll wash today," he said on the 8th morning, placing a bucket of water and a bar of soap on the floor. She hesitated only a second before nodding. "Thank you." The words tasted strange in her mouth, but she said them anyway. Eli watched as she cleaned herself, his gaze fixed on the wall rather than her body. It was not modesty, it was discipline. When she finished, he removed the bucket, locked the door, and left. That night, Clara replayed the interaction again and again. He responded to compliance. He rewarded predictability. This wasn't about desire in the way she had feared. It was about control, about shaping behavior. On the 10th day, he spoke longer than usual. "You don't ask questions anymore," he said, setting down her meal. She kept her eyes lowered. "You don't like questions." A pause. The faintest tightening of his jaw. "That's correct." She felt it then, the smallest shift in balance. Not power, but leverage. Clara began to regulate herself deliberately. She timed her breathing. She ate slowly. She spoke only when spoken to, and when she did, her voice was calm, almost gentle, not submissive, neutral. Eli seemed to relax in response, his movements less rigid, his presence lingering a few seconds longer before he left. Days blurred together, but patterns emerged. Eli always checked the chain first, always locked the door twice, always brought exactly enough food, not generous, not insufficient. Once, when Clara accidentally spilled water, he stared at the puddle on the floor for a long moment, then said nothing and left. That evening her portion was smaller. She did not spill again. At night, Clara rehearsed conversations silently, what to say, what not to say. She constructed a version of herself designed to be acceptable, quiet, thoughtful, grateful. She did not cry where he could hear. She did not beg, and she listened. Eli talked sometimes, not about her, about the forest, about weather patterns, about how people underestimated nature. He spoke with authority, with the assurance of someone who had spent decades being listened to. "Out there," he said one evening, gesturing vaguely beyond the walls, "people think the trails keep them safe. They don't understand how easy it is to disappear." "Is that why you patrol so much?" Clara asked carefully. He looked at her, surprised. "Yes." That was all he said, but the word lingered between them. On the 14th day he brought another item, a thin blanket, for the cold, he said. She accepted it with both hands. "I appreciate it." Eli paused at the door longer than usual. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "You're adjusting?" "Yes," she said. "I am." It was not a lie. The chain rubbed her ankle raw. The skin broke, then scabbed, then broke again. She said nothing. Complaints, she suspected, would be interpreted as resistance. At night, she wrapped the wound with a strip torn from her shirt, hiding the blood beneath the blanket before morning. On the 17th day, Eli noticed anyway. "You're hurt," he said, crouching just far enough to see the damage. "It's nothing." He stood abruptly and left. Clara's heart raced, not fear of pain, but fear of having miscalculated. He returned later with ointment and a bandage. "I don't want infections," he said flatly. "They complicate things." He treated the wound himself, his touch efficient, clinical. When he finished, he locked the chain again, tighter this time, ensuring it wouldn't shift. That night, Clara understood something essential. She was not meant to die here. She was meant to remain. That distinction mattered. It meant food would come, water would come, care, in its distorted form, would continue. And that meant time. Time to observe, time to remember, time to wait. On the 20th day, Eli placed the paperback book beside her plate. "I thought you might get bored," he said. She picked it up reverently. "Thank you." He nodded once and left. The book became more than distraction. It was proof of the outside world, a reminder that language still existed beyond command and compliance. Clara read each page slowly, sometimes out loud when she was certain she was alone, anchoring herself to the sound of her own voice. She began marking days in the margins with tiny, almost invisible dots. One per day, a record, evidence. On the 21st night, Clara lay awake, listening to the forest breathe around the cabin. She no longer imagined immediate escape. That fantasy had burned itself out. Instead, she focused on something else. Survival was not resistance. Survival was patience. And patience, she realized, might one day look exactly like obedience. Clara began to think of her mind as a locked drawer. Some things were allowed out: gratitude, obedience, politeness. Others were sealed tightly inside, hidden even from herself: anger, hatred, the screams she sometimes wanted to unleash into the walls of the cabin. She kept those buried, where they couldn't be seen or used against her. The performance had become part of her. She smiled at the right moments, nodded when spoken to, offered short, harmless answers. She thanked Eli for food, for water, even for silence. She had learned how to study him without appearing to. By the 4th week, she could read the temperature of his mood within seconds. The angle of his shoulders as he stepped through the door. The way his eyes flicked around the room. Whether or not his hands were trembling. Whether or not he smelled like smoke from outside, which meant he'd been alone by the fire too long, stewing in whatever thoughts lived in his head. She had not attempted escape. She had not tested the chain again. Her ankle, though healing, still bore the dark bruise of early resistance. A reminder. A lesson. On the 29th day, Eli lingered after dinner. The lamp burned low. The shadows flickered like they were listening. "You seem calmer," he said. Clara set the tin plate aside. "I think I understand more now." "Understand what? You—" The words weren't a trap. They were carefully chosen, softened with genuine tone. Because Clara knew that Eli wasn't immune to validation. He needed it in the way dry wood needed flame, quietly, constantly. He sat down in the chair near the door. Not close, but closer than usual. "I was married once," he said, unprompted. She didn't answer, just tilted her head slightly, signaling that he could continue if he wanted. "It didn't last," he said. "She said I loved the forest more than I loved her. Maybe she was right." He rubbed a hand across his face, the fingers trembling slightly. "She took our daughter and moved back east. That was 15 years ago. I haven't seen either of them since." Clara's voice was soft. "Do you miss them?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared at the wood floor as if it held the answer. Not at first, but over time, yeah. The silence gets loud. She understood that. Not the loss, not in the same way, but the silence. The kind that howled around you when you tried to sleep, pressing into your ears, filling your lungs. The kind of silence that made a person crave the sound of another voice, even a dangerous one. Eli stood slowly. "You remind me of someone," he said. "Not my wife, someone else. Someone I met a long time ago. She was quiet like you, thoughtful." Clara didn't ask who. She knew he wouldn't say. Instead, she offered what he wanted most. "I don't mind the quiet," she said. "Not when there's trust." The word hung in the air like smoke. Trust. Eli left without another word. That night, Clara didn't sleep, not out of fear but calculation. The more Eli talked, the more she saw the contours of the prison she was in. Not just the physical walls, but the psychological ones. His need for control was not born from pure sadism. It came from damage, from abandonment, from a life that had unraveled without him ever knowing how to stitch it back together. She began to think of him not as a monster, but as a man with a broken compass, and broken things, she knew, could sometimes be redirected. In the following days, Clara became more inquisitive, carefully. She asked about the trails, the rivers, the names of certain birds she could hear outside the cabin. Eli answered, cautiously at first, then with growing interest. He brought her a pencil stub and a small notepad on the 35th day. "For drawing," he said, "or writing, whatever you want." She opened it reverently, like it was sacred. "Thank you," she said. In truth, she had no interest in sketching. What she wanted was a place to record details. Not just about the cabin, but about Eli, his speech patterns, his routine, anything she might use later. But she also began writing for herself. Fragments, thoughts, sentences that sounded like prayers or survival mantras. "He sees what I allow. The forest is not mine, but I am part of it now. Obedience is not submission." Wait. On the 38th night, Eli sat with her after dinner. "I used to dream," he said, staring at the stove. "Before all this, I used to think I'd retire somewhere near the water, a small place. Just trees and tide. What changed?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I stopped believing anyone would stay." He stood abruptly and left. The door shut with less force than usual. Clara watched the flame in the lamp for a long time afterward. It danced without rhythm, casting long, uncertain shadows across the room. She felt the chain tug slightly as she shifted, but she didn't flinch, because something was changing. Not freedom, not yet, but alignment, and in alignment there was power. The first real change came on a morning when Eli didn't arrive. Clara noticed it not because of hunger but because of the silence. The forest outside the cabin continued its rhythm, whined through branches, the distant knock of a woodpecker, but the sound she had learned to expect, the measured crunch of boots on leaves, never came. Hours passed. The gray light at the base of the door shifted into something brighter, then faded again. By the time the door finally opened, Clara had already decided something was wrong. Eli staggered inside, breathing heavily. His face was pale, the skin beneath his eyes darkened and drawn tight. He carried no food, no water. "I'm fine," he said before she could speak. "Just tired." He sat down hard on the chair, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. Clara watched carefully, keeping her body still, her expression neutral. "You should rest," she said quietly. "You don't look well." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Funny. You telling me that, I mean it, that was the truth, not compassion, calculation. If he was unwell, the structure he had built might begin to crack." He stood again after a moment, visibly unsteady. "I'll bring extra food tonight, in case I don't come back tomorrow." The words landed heavily between them. That night he brought more than usual. Cans, bottled water, firewood, enough for several days. He stacked them neatly near the stove, then paused, as if reconsidering something. "You behave," he said. "That matters." When he left, Clara sat in the center of the cabin, staring at the door long after the lock clicked shut. For the first time since her abduction, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond the next meal. Eli didn't return the following day, or the one after that. On the third day alone, Clara's attention turned outward. With no immediate threat present, her senses sharpened. She tested the chain again, still solid, still unyielding, but she noticed something new, a faint groove in the floor near the bed. Not from her. Older. Repeated movement. Someone had paced here before. The thought chilled her. She examined the room with renewed focus, crawling carefully within the limited radius of the chain. Behind the stove, partially obscured by a loose plank, she found a small hollow. Inside it, wrapped in oil-stained cloth, was a notebook. Her hands shook as she opened it. The pages were filled with tight, meticulous handwriting. Dates, observations, names, her name, Clara Voss. The first entry referencing her was dated nearly 3 months before their meeting at the ranger station. Solo female hiker. Experienced. Regular visitor to national parks. Prefers isolated trails. Her breath caught. Page after page described her movements. Parks she had visited, routes she favored, even photographs she had posted online. There were notes about her habits, her gear, her tendency to travel alone. This was not chance. This was not impulse. This was selection. Clara pressed the notebook to her chest, fighting the urge to retch. The image she had constructed of Eli, A damaged, lonely man who had crossed a line collapsed inward, revealing something far colder beneath. He had been watching her. For how long, she didn't know, but long enough to erase any illusion of randomness. She was not simply unlucky, she had been chosen. That night, Eli returned. He looked worse, feverish. His movements were slower, less precise. He didn't notice the notebook missing from its hiding place. "You look tired," Clara said softly. "So do you," he replied, lowering himself onto the chair. "You should rest more." She nodded, her heart pounding so hard she feared he could hear it. "Do you ever think about before?" she asked carefully. "Before you worked here?" He frowned slightly. "Why?" "I was just thinking, people don't just become who they are overnight." Something shifted in his expression. A crack. Or perhaps an opening. "I used to think I was invisible," he said after a moment. "Out there, at the station, to everyone. But here—" He gestured vaguely around them. "Here, things make sense." Clara swallowed. "Because you're seen." He looked at her then. Really looked. Yes. She understood the danger now more clearly than ever. The illusion of mutuality was not a mistake. It was the cornerstone of his reality. Over the next weeks, Eli grew weaker. He coughed more, slept longer. He spoke in fragments, sometimes losing track of time. Once he called her by another name. She corrected him gently. "It's Clara." He blinked, confused, then nodded. "Right, Clara." The notebook never left her thoughts. She reread it when she was alone, memorizing details, committing them to memory, evidence, proof, not just for the world but for herself. One evening, as Eli sat staring into the unlit stove, she said quietly, "You know, if something happened to you, no one would know I was here." He turned to her slowly. "I know," he said. "That's why I trust you." The word struck her like a blow. Trust. She lowered her eyes, hiding the truth burning behind them. Because she understood now, hope wasn't something that arrived suddenly. It crept in through fractures, and the cabin was beginning to crack. Time lost its shape inside the cabin. Seasons replaced dates. The air grew heavy with the scent of pine and damp rot as spring turned to summer, then crisp and brittle as autumn arrived. Snow came not long after, silent and merciless, pressing in on the wooden walls, forcing Clara and Eli into tighter, more confined routines. With no clock and no calendar, Clara began marking time in increments she invented, the number of firewood stacks used, the wear pattern on the stove handle, the changing pitch of birdsong outside. The body followed its own clock. Hunger, thirst, fatigue, pain. These were constants, unaffected by the passing of days. Her skin thinned, her muscles softened, the chain rubbed a permanent groove into her ankle, scar tissue forming over bruises long faded. She moved less, spoke less, and dreamed even less. But her mind remained hers. Each small act of observation became a defiance. Each memory committed to paper. A tether to the outside world. Each nod, smile, or whispered thank you became a line in the script she had crafted for survival. Eli was changing too. It began subtly. He would lose track of conversations, repeat himself, forget what day he last brought food. His body slumped more, his walks grew shorter, his silence heavier. At times, he spoke to her as if she were someone else, a name Clara didn't recognize, or worse, the name of his long-lost daughter. He once entered the cabin, dropped to his knees beside her and whispered, "You grew up so fast." Clara didn't correct him. Not anymore. Correction caused confusion. Confusion brought volatility. Instead, she leaned into the performance. "I missed you, Dad," she said softly, and watched his face break into something dangerously close to peace. From that moment on, Clara played many roles. Sometimes she was the daughter, obedient, grateful, forgiving. Other times she was the companion, listening, attentive, kind, but never. Not once was she Clara Voss, the woman who had hiked into Cascade Wilderness alone. That identity existed only in fragments now. In fading memories of her mother's voice, in flashes of the apartment she had left behind, in the pages of the notebook, hidden beneath a floorboard, beside the now empty oil-stained cloth. More than once she considered ending it, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, just quietly, refusing food, letting herself go still. But the thought of disappearing without a trace, without anyone ever knowing the truth, galvanized something inside her. She would not become another shadow in the trees. Not like the ones posted on missing flyers back at the ranger station. Not like the women whose names she had read in Eli's notes. So she endured. By the second winter, Eli rarely left the cabin grounds. He walked in slow circles around the perimeter, mumbling to himself. He kept a hunting knife strapped to his belt at all times, even inside. His paranoia deepened, though not in a way that made him cruel. He wasn't violent. He wasn't sexual. His obsession wasn't with domination anymore. It was with permanence. "You're the only one who's never left," he told her once, as he stood staring at the door. "They all leave." "I'm not going anywhere," she replied, and meant it. She watched him carefully after that, not for moments of weakness, but for opportunity. On the morning of her third spring in captivity, something shifted. The key. It was always on his belt, fastened with a loop. He never removed it, not while he slept, not while he sat. But that day, as he stumbled in with a fever, he dropped it on the chair beside the bed. Just for a second. He was coughing so hard he didn't notice. Clara stared at it, every nerve in her body lit with electricity, but she didn't move. Not then. That night she replayed the moment again and again. The temptation, the hesitation, the discipline. Timing, she reminded herself. Not courage, not desperation. Timing. By her fourth year, Clara no longer fantasized about rescue. She fantasized about control, about doors that opened outward, about boots on her own feet, stepping through snow-covered underbrush, about rivers she would follow downstream until she found the edge of a map. Eli grew thinner, quieter. His mind unraveled in long, quiet threads. He talked to walls. He murmured prayers into the fire. Some days he forgot to lock the second bolt on the door. Once he left the cabin open for nearly a full hour. Clara didn't try to run, not yet. Instead, she studied the terrain whenever he took her outside to wash. She memorized the angle of the sun through the trees, the sound of running water, the way the earth sloped westward from the clearing. She counted her steps on the chain, 12 forward, 2 left, 4 back. Every detail became part of a map only she could see, and still she waited, because escape wasn't just about fleeing. It was about leaving no trace behind. It was about leaving something Eli couldn't erase. On the 5th spring, though she could no longer say with certainty that it was spring at all, Eli collapsed. It happened mid-sentence. One moment he was stirring something on the stove, speaking about how the squirrels had returned earlier this year, and the next he was on the floor, his body jerking, a guttural noise escaping from his throat. Clara called out his name, loud but not panicked. He didn't respond. The key was still at his belt. She moved slowly, carefully, every step rehearsed 100 times in her mind. She knelt beside him, reached under his hip, and unhooked the key. He groaned. She didn't freeze. She unlocked the chain. 5 years collapsed in the sound of a single click. She stood, barefoot, bruised, thin as a shadow, and walked to the door. She didn't run, not yet, because the forest outside was vast, and she still had no map. But now, finally, she had the key. Eli lay still for several minutes after collapsing. Clara watched from the edge of the room, her hands clenched tightly, eyes fixed on the rise and fall of his chest. Shallow, irregular, but there. He wasn't dead. Not yet. When he stirred, groaning, disoriented, she didn't panic. Instead, she crossed the room slowly and knelt beside him. "You're sick," she said, keeping her voice low, steady. "You need help." His eyes fluttered open. The color in them was dulled, unfocused. "I just need medicine," he rasped. In the other cabin, first aid kit, she hesitated, not because she doubted him, but because this was it, the moment. If she moved too fast, he'd suspect. Too slow, he might collapse again. "I'll take you," she said. "Lean on me." It took effort to lift him. He weighed more than she remembered, dead weight now, damp with fever. He slung an arm over her shoulder, and together they staggered out into the daylight. The sun hit her like an open palm. For the first time in 5 years, Clara felt the full warmth of the outside world on her face. She blinked rapidly, adjusting to the brightness. Eli mumbled directions as they walked, left past the fire pit, down a slope, then across a small wooden bridge half swallowed by moss. He pointed weakly through a thicket of trees. There, barely visible, stood a second cabin, larger, more intact, a ranger's cabin, official. Clara's heart began to race. Inside, the space was radically different. Windows, light, a real bed, a shelf of gear. Compasses, maps, radios. A portable generator in the corner, silent, and mounted on the wall, a 2-way radio set. Eli sank into a chair, wheezing, pointing toward the first aid kit. Clara retrieved it, handed him antibiotics, watched him swallow the pills with shaking hands. Then she crossed the room, picked up the radio and turned the dial. Static. She clicked the channel switch, once, twice, then pressed the call button. "This is Clara Voss," she said, her voice brittle. "I'm alive. I'm at a ranger cabin somewhere in the Cascade backcountry. I was taken 5 years ago. The line hissed, then a crackle. "Repeat your name," came a voice. Male, calm, uncertain, Clara Voss. "I was reported missing June 10, 2012. I've been held captive. I escaped. I need help." Another pause, then a second voice joined the frequency, softer, almost disbelieving. "Clara? Is that really you?" She nearly dropped the radio. Yes, it's me. Please send help. I don't know how much time I have. Clara, stay calm. We're triangulating the signal. A helicopter is being dispatched now. Can you confirm?" The sound of a chair scraping behind her turned her blood to ice. Eli was standing, and in his hand, the hunting knife. Her body froze. "You lied," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You promised." Clara stepped back. "Eli, you need rest. You're sick. I was just trying to get help. You said you'd stay. He lunged. She knocked the radio off the table and ran. The front door slammed open as she burst outside, the forest swallowing her whole. She ran without direction, barefoot, dodging roots and branches. Her lungs burned, legs trembling. Behind her, Eli crashed through the brush, calling her name, first pleading, then screaming, "You were mine." The path narrowed, then opened again into a clearing. Circular, flat, surrounded by tall evergreens. She stopped in the center, chest heaving, no more cover. And Eli appeared at the edge, knife raised. "Don't make me do this," he shouted. She turned slowly to face him. "I'm not yours," she said. Before he could answer, the thudding of blades ripped through the sky above. A shadow passed over them. Then a spotlight. A helicopter descended, whipping the trees into chaos. Through the wind and noise she saw figures, rangers, armed, shouting through bullhorns. "Drop the weapon! Hands on your head!" Eli's face crumpled. His shoulders sagged. The knife fell from his hand. And just like that, it was over. He dropped to his knees, covered his face, and did not resist as 2 officers pinned him to the ground. Clara stood motionless as another figure approached her. Tall, in uniform, eyes wide. "You're safe," he said. "We've got you." She collapsed into his arms. Clara remembered fragments more than moments after that. The vibration of the helicopter floor beneath her bare feet. A blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. A medic's voice repeating her name again and again, as if anchoring her to the present. The forest fell away beneath them, shrinking into a pattern of green and shadow she no longer recognized as a place she belonged. She did not cry at first. Shock had sealed her emotions behind a thick, numb wall. Her body shook, but her face remained still as they flew toward the nearest hospital. The medic noted her weight, the scar tissue around her ankle, the malnutrition, the tremor in her hands that did not stop even when the helicopter stabilized. 5 years, someone whispered nearby. Not realizing she could hear, in the emergency room, fluorescent lights replaced firelight. Clean sheets replaced dirt-stained fabric. Nurses spoke in calm, efficient tones, documenting injuries that told a story her mouth could not yet form. X-rays, blood tests, photographs of scars that had once been hidden beneath long pants and silence. A psychologist sat beside her bed that first night. "You don't have to tell us everything," she said gently. "Not now." Clara stared at the ceiling. "If I don't," she replied, her voice flat, "he becomes a story people argue about. I don't want that." The investigation unfolded methodically. Search teams returned to the cabin, photographed it, measured it, logged every item inside, the chains, the tools, the hidden notebook, the secondary ranger cabin with its radio and generator. Each detail contradicted the official narrative that had once closed her case as an accident. Eli Sutton was arrested without resistance. In custody, he said little. He did not deny what he had done. He did not apologize. He told investigators calmly that he had kept her safe. "That forest kills people," he said. "I didn't." The trial took place the following year. By then Clara had regained some weight, her hair had grown longer, her voice steadier, but the scars remained, some visible, others not. She testified for 3 days. She spoke of the cabin, the chain, the silence. She spoke of time losing meaning, of learning how to disappear without dying. The courtroom listened in stillness, broken only by the scratch of pens and the soft sob of her mother in the front row. Eli did not look at her while she spoke. His defense argued psychological impairment, isolation, depression, obsession born of abandonment. Experts testified. Charts were shown. Diagnoses debated. But when the jury returned, their decision was unanimous. Guilty, multiple counts, kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, aggravated assault, life sentences. As he was led away, Eli finally turned. His eyes met Clara's for the first time since the rescue. "You were never meant to leave," he said quietly. She did not respond. After the trial, Clara changed her name. She moved states, changed routines. She avoided forests, avoided silence. Nightmares came uninvited. Some nights she woke certain she could still feel the weight of iron on her ankle. But other things changed too. She began working with a non-profit that supported families of missing persons. She spoke to parents who refused to give up hope. She told them what she wished someone had told her mother. Sometimes, she said, the truth is still out there, waiting. Years later, Clara stood at the edge of a small city park. Children laughed nearby. A breeze moved through the trees, not dense forest, not wilderness, just enough green to remind her of what she had survived. She did not step beneath the trees, not yet, but she watched them without fear. In interviews, when asked what had kept her alive, she never gave a single answer. Not strength, not courage, not hope. Patience, she said once. And the decision not to disappear quietly. The forest still stands. The cabin is gone now, dismantled, erased from the map, but some places do not vanish so easily. They